gives me great pleasure to introduce Pedro Mediano, Dr. Mediano, who was due to give a talk earlier, but unfortunately in this world of COVID, you came down with it. And would you live to tell the tale?
I lived, yeah, survived.
Survived, barely. Imagine what it would have been like if you didn't have that. I assume you had 3.
Yeah.
So, well, that's the progress of science for you. And I think what is really exciting today actually is to hear about when many become one. And you know, I'm particularly excited about this because of course we've been talking about this for a long time. And I think you have some really exciting ideas that sort of complements what we've already heard from the other seminars. And I think there's something, as they said, you know, at the height of the gold rush, there could be gold in their minds, yes? And so I hope you will convince us of the gold. So please.
Let's see. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks Morten for inviting me to give this talk. Slightly delayed after the first COVID-ridden attempt. But here we are. So I'm going to talk about the science of emergence. Before I start, just to give a very quick acknowledgement to the people that actually contributed to this talk. I was just passing by, but mostly Fernando, Andrea, Daniel, and Madalena, and some other collaborators and everyone in the Cambridge Consciousness and Cognition Lab. And just to give you a warning, essentially, this is how this talk is going to go. So I have way too many slides. And I'm going to start with a very detailed picture of emergence and my motivation and what it is I'm doing, and then towards the end, we'll see how far we can go. Feel free to ask questions, by the way. Worst thing that can happen is I won't be able to get to the end of my slides, but I mean, you're lost, right? I already know this stuff. So ask away. Cool. So let me start first by showing you a bit of a couple of videos. So let me start by showing you a couple of videos that kind of illustrate or evoke some images of what I'm trying to discuss today. This is a video that you may have already seen. This is a video of the neural activity captured in a larval zebrafish. You can see these real-time imaging with different parts of the brain activating, some of them in synchrony, some of them independently. Sometimes there's these sort of big spontaneous cascade events like we saw there. There's a video you may have seen, and then here is another video that I also find very intriguing. And what we see here now is a completely different phenomenon. It's a murmuration of starlings. These are spontaneous sort of formations of birds flying in the sky that somewhat magically assemble into these weird shape-shifting patterns that scatter across the sky. And unlike other animals that herd or school, for survival or to avoid predators, these guys seem to basically do this for fun, creating these very mesmerizing patterns. Why is it that we care about these two phenomena? What's in common between them? I'm going to argue, and the theme of my talk is going to be that these two are very tightly connected cases of a broader phenomenon called collective behavior. It's basically a phenomena or systems that are composed by many interacting parts, and it is the interaction between those parts that gives rise to some interesting high-level properties, whatever those are. So at a personal level, my research goal is to discover the fundamental principles of these collective behaviors. And these include the behavior of large groups of agents that are somehow acting as a whole. Just to give you a few examples of what this is, so the brain is one such example, that's made by a collection of billions and billions of neurons. Starlings and many other examples in nature, but also other slightly more different examples like modern artificial intelligence systems like neural networks, right? Those are themselves made of many interacting components. And also slightly outside the realm of science and engineering, there's social phenomena, because we as humans, we band together, we cooperate to achieve things that we can't achieve on our own. And that is in itself another form of collective behavior. So we care about collective behavior as a field. Well, I'm going to give you 4 reasons. One of them is to build better AI systems, because if we can understand how these sort of systems that are made of many interacting pieces work, we can build better ones that behave in the way that we want them to behave. We also care about collective behavior to understand ourselves, again, because we are such a collective behavior of our sort of internal components. We also care to fix it when it breaks, because I strongly suspect, and I hope that many of you would agree, that sort of many mental phenomena that we feel, that we experience, are themselves determined by these interactions between different elements of our brains. And finally, to understand the world, because there's, one of the themes that you will see during this talk is that, at least I as a physicist, I'm trying to see unifying principles that are common across a wide variety of natural phenomena, not only in the neurons in the brain and birds in a flock, but also across the hierarchy of physics, in the sense that atoms get together to form molecules, molecules get together to form bodies, and they behave in sort of all sorts of interesting ways. And the common principle behind all of these phenomena I'm going to describe is the phenomenon of emergence, which, very briefly speaking, very formally, is phenomena in which the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And again, we see this in mathematics, we see this in social phenomena, we see this in natural phenomena like this, beautiful pictures of schools of fish. And again, just to give you a few more examples, I'm generally fascinated by these things. So we see this in animal brains, human brains. There's also some beautiful examples of synchronization of fireflies in the natural environment that we'll get to a bit later. We also see emergence in galaxies and cosmological formations of all sorts. And again, social systems. And this picture is, I'm particularly fond of it. This is from the May the 15th protests back in Valencia, Spain, where people were protesting for a sort of free and high-quality public educational system. And this was in my first year of undergrad, so I was being part of this movement. Actually, this is a fantastic case of visual perception, if anyone's interested. I don't know if in this picture, but some other picture for sure. In this protest, there was a helicopter moving around, and I suddenly get a phone call, and that phone call is from my grandma asking me, where am I? Turns out the helicopter had a camera that was broadcasting on TV, and among this sort of tide of people, I was spotted and immediately called out. Cool, so let's talk a bit about the science of emergence. So essentially the main questions I want to be dealing with today is, can we develop a formal science of emergence? And can it help us understand ourselves and others? And my answer to these is going to be decisively yes, and that is thanks to recent developments in complexity science. So in this talk, I'm going to split it in 3 parts. First of all, we'll talk about a rigorous mathematical theory of cause and emergence that my collaborators and I have introduced. In part 2, we're going to talk about consciousness, emergence, and brain hierarchy. So we're going to apply some of these concepts to the study of the brain. And then in the last part, that I hope will have some time, we're going to talk about a new project that's sort of an interaction between emergence and art that goes by the name of SYNCH.LIVE, and I'm very excited to tell you about it. All right, so let's get cracking. First of all, I'm going to give you a few sort of slightly more theoretically minded slides to define the framework in which we're doing all of this, and then we'll move on to the experimental results. So first of all, I'm going to start with a very sort of abstract example, but I hope you'll empathize. And some of you may have heard this before. You've seen my collaborator Fernando Rosa speak. So let's say we get to the center, and suddenly we find that the cookies are missing. So someone stole the cookies. And we do what any reasonable person would do, which is call a detective and try to find out who committed this heinous crime. So we hire a detective and we have a bunch of suspects. And we guess that we hypothesize that one of them must have stolen the cookies. Our detective does its job, and we get 2 witnesses that are able to provide information about the different suspects. And just to give a bit more context, all of this is basically, I'm giving very informal descriptions, but I'm essentially trying to describe concepts within information theory. That is the basic building block of our emergence theory that we're going to see in a little bit. So we have these 2 witnesses, and we can see these 2 witnesses somewhat informally as different sources of information. Both of them will have different bits of information that they know about who the suspect was, about who the culprit was. So we go to the first witness, and the first witness says that the culprit had a mustache. And if we know that the culprit had a mustache, then we can immediately cross out some of the suspects. So by eliminating some possibilities, this gives us information in the mathematical sense of the word. the first witness also says that the culprit was wearing a hat, which again allows us to cross out some of the suspects. Now we'll turn to the second witness, and they say that the culprit was wearing a hat and moustache, and that they had brown hair, which again allows us to cross out some of the other suspects. So you will notice a very interesting phenomenon here, which is that none of the witnesses on their own know who the culprit was. Right? In both cases, there's still more than one possibility. So none of them knows the culprit, but if we have access to both witnesses, if we have access to both sources of information, suddenly we can see that it was this guy who stole cookies. So there's something that can be obtained by the combination of these two sources of information that we couldn't have obtained otherwise. In mathematical terms, we're going to label these different types of information as redundancy. That's information that both sources of information provide. Some unique information, that is information that one of the sources provide but not the other. And finally, synergy, which is information that we obtain when we have all of the sources of information combined. We'll see that synergy will play a very big role in our theory of emergence and subsequent experiments. How do we formalize all of this? I'm not going to give you a lot of details, but I'm just going to give you a few pointers to this theory. That's called the partial information decomposition, or PID framework, introduced by Williams and Beer in about 12 years ago. Time flies. So in PID, basically the mutual information between two variables, or between two sets of variables, is split into these three terms: redundancy, synergy, and redundancy, unique information, and synergy, and can be represented. And can be represented in the form of this Venn diagram. What I'm going to argue, and one of the key takeaways from this theory is that synergy quantifies the information that is contained in the whole, but not in any of the parts. And you may already be starting to see or to have an intuition for some similarities between synergy and emergence, as I've been describing it informally before. I'm going to take a brief aside and mention and talk about Venn diagrams, because I'm a big fan of Venn diagrams. That is one of my favorite Venn diagrams. This one is also a lot of fun, as is this one. Not as fun, really. And then finally, the philosopher's Venn diagram, which is this one. Now with that out of the way, how do we mathematize this? Again, I'm going to have a few more sort of mathematically or theoretically oriented slides. If there is anything that's unclear, please let me know. But I'm going to focus on the concepts rather than the details of the math. So if we take a step back and we look at how all of these get put into math, we'll see that not all correlations are born equal. So what do we mean? Let's imagine that we have two random variables. I'm going to represent them as rings. So two variables can either be correlated, and in statistics we say they are coupled, or not. And this is captured by this object, this function that's called the mutual information. So we can visualize two variables that are coupled, that are statistically coupled, as two rings that cannot be detached. Right? So they're not independent from each other. When you have two rings only, that's all fine and good. But what happens if you have more than two rings? What happens if you have three or more? Suddenly, there are different types of correlations, there are different ways in which these rings can be tied to each other. And I have these two very specific examples here. So I'm going to ask you to look at the rings on the left, and these are known as the Borromean rings. And they have one very specific and very interesting property. Try to get a green ring over here, and try to mentally remove it from the picture, just make it disappear. What happens to the red and the blue ring? They come apart. They're not dependent anymore. Right? So this interaction, this knot between the three rings, is something that we see in the whole, but we do not see in any of the parts. Conversely, the rings on the right represent redundancy. Do the same exercise, take one of these silver rings out and see what happens to the other two. The other two remain bound. Right? So again, once we go from 2 to 3 variables and further on, suddenly there are different kinds of information or different kinds of correlation in a system that we can treat differently in mathematical terms. We can put all of this into math with this framework of Williams and Beer of partial information decomposition. So we have two predictors, x1 and x2, and one target variable y, something that we are predicting. Then we can talk mathematically about basically the joint predictability, how much can I predict y using both x1, x2, and the margin of predictability, how much can I predict y using only x1 or only x2. And this is again this mutual information function. However, what happens is that sometimes actually the predictability of the whole could be more than the sum of the predictabilities of the parts. And to capture this, Williams and Baer proposed this PID postulate that basically mathematically splits this mutual information into redundancy, unique information, and synergy. And again, you can find all the details in this fantastic paper by Williams and Baer in 2010. As a brief example of synergy, it is brief, but the sort of quintessential example of synergy is this system called the XOR logic gate, that you may have seen where you put the 2 bits 0, 1 in, and you get 1 bit out, 0, 1, and basically everything this logic gate does is tell you if the 2 inputs are the same or are different. So again, this is what's called the truth table, so if you put these 2 as input, you get this thing as output, and so on for the other, or 4 possible combinations. What's the catch with the XOR? Why is it so synergistic? Because if you know one of the inputs, actually you can't predict the output at all. If I tell you what one of the input was, but I don't tell you the other one, you have no idea. There's zero predictive power over the output. However, if I tell you both, now you know everything. You can predict the output exactly. So this is exactly the same case as we had with the rings, where if we know what the state of every variable is, we can predict the state of the system perfectly. It is statistically dependent, but if one of the pieces is left out, suddenly everything is lost. Again, like in the Borromean rings a few slides ago. There we go. So that's a brief introduction to this concept of synergy. Now let's try to put this into use into some applications. And I'm going to give you a few pointers to these things. So this is, for example, how we began to think about these things. My colleague Fernando and I, a few years ago, started using these ideas of synergy and information decomposition to talk about self-organization. And there's some interesting analogies that we made with marble sculptures and dynamical systems. And another important application, which is what I'm going to be talking the rest of the talk, is this theory of causal emergence and how we actually use these ideas to formalize the intuitions that I mentioned at the start of my talk. There are also other applications, commercial applications, in the form of kombucha and organic tea, which I will not be covering in my talk, but I am aware they exist. Good, so let's go now and define emergence. So what's the setting here? The setting here, again, gonna get a bit more mathsy for a few more slides, and then there won't be any more equations, I promise. So in the setting here, let's say imagine that we have a system with n sort of microscopic components that we think as the sort of low-level constituent of the system. Imagine, the individual activity of n neurons in some part of the brain. We're going to describe those as x, t, so x at time t. And then we also have a supervenient macroscopic feature v that is some possibly noisy function of x, right? Which is, imagine some sort of high-level pattern that corresponds to some, say, population coding between the neurons, some property of the whole. And as an informal definition, we say that a feature v that says something about the feature, so emergence, it happens when a feature v says something about the feature that individual macroscopic elements do not. How do we put this in math? Well, we say that causal emergence happens when, that a supervenient feature v exhibits causal emergence if it has some unique information about the feature conditioned on the past of the system. So if this macro tells you something about the dynamical evolution of the system that none of the micro components tells you on their own. Again, you can already see the elements of the synergy framework appearing, although I'm not making any very mathematically precise statements. So there's only one problem here, actually, which is that I've already started with this definition of VT. So if you compute this unique information, we need to know V in advance. We need to already know if there's some form of population coding between these neurons and what that might look like if we want to actually use these sort of mathematical criteria. However, that's not necessarily the case. So if we use more PID, then we can actually prove that a system has causally emergent features if and only if the synergy in the dynamical evolution of the system, so the synergy from the past to the future state of the system, is greater than 0. Essentially what this says is that emergence is a sort of emergence capacity of the system. if the system is synergistic, then it can host some emergent phenomena. So far so good. We have some definition of emergence, and we have some sort of intrinsic criterion to tell if a system is capable of showing any emergent phenomenon, although we may not know what that phenomenon is. Any questions so far? Yes?
Yeah, it's really clarification, but I'm getting a little bit lost because I come from a background where when you talk about emergent properties, standard example that's used is the smell of ammonia, which you can't predict from knowledge of the nitrogen and the hydrogen. But of course, whether you can predict it, given some background information, is another question. And you can't if you don't know anything about the human sensory system that picks up the molecules of NH3. But if you do know something about that, then you can predict that a human being will smell a certain smell. I mean, you can't predict that it's subjective quality, but you can predict that there's going to be a smell. So how does that relate to this definition of emergence? Is your definition, which involves the idea of prediction, dependent upon background information?
Probably, yes. So one of the important things that this depends on
is... it's not an objective property, or it's a relational property dependent upon the epistemic position of the observer.
That's a very subtle but very important point, yes. So this does depend on some epistemic properties of the observer, yes. I think that the moment you get any probability distribution involved, then you're immediately into the realm of epistemic judgment. And this is certainly no exception. So in this case, it would depend on how much you know about the behavior of the individual hydrogen, nitrogen atoms, and your knowledge about how they combine together. And then if you put all of this knowledge into the mix, you could probably use this theory to calculate the emergence of some structural properties of ammonia.
But it's a secondary quality, so it depends upon its observer on it. It depends upon the sensory mechanisms of human beings.
Well, so I would put that actually into this idea of this supervenience or this macro property V, right? You could define something like, the macro level property is some features of how this interacts with the human smell system. And then you could see if you can predict the interactions with this human smell system based on the individual atoms or the molecule as a whole. Does that make some form of sense?
So does the underlying physical basis of the smell of ammonia count as an emergent property?
I don't know. I don't know enough about the physical basis of the smell of ammonia. Sorry?
Does it fit your definition? And is there synergy involved?
I would suspect so, because neither hydrogen nor nitrogen on their own smells ammonia, right? Nor anything like it. So there's indeed something in the interaction of those atoms that must synergistically trigger the smell. Therefore, I would probably class it under this theory. There's a lot more that needs to go on top in terms of these sort of pieces of knowledge on the sides, but I think it might fit, although again, I'm not an expert.
Don't know why you think that, but
okay, well, let's go. I think these are very interesting discussion. Maybe let's take it offline, if that's okay. Are there any more questions here or online? No? Amazing. Let's get cracking. So this definition that we've just seen of emergence basically tells us whether there is emergence or not in a given system, but it doesn't tell us what kind of emergence there is. So now let's try to move into this idea that there may be more than one kind of emergence. And in particular, I'm going to distinguish between two types of emergence. One of them is going to be downward causation. So phenomena in which macroscopic features affect individual elements of the system. And another one that is a bit weird, there's actually a kind of mathematical curiosity that we stumbled upon and no one had reported before, that I'm going to call causal decoupling, which is a phenomenon whereby macroscopic features can affect other macroscopic features. Very much like, thought patterns in your brain affecting each other, but being somewhat decoupled from the specific neural substrate that generates them. And I'm going to make this a bit more mathematically precise in a sec. So the overall picture that we want to draw is basically this, where we have a system X that is evolving over time, we have some macroscopic property V that we can compute at both time steps. There's a normal temporal evolution going from xt to xt prime, and then these two types of emergence. So downward causation corresponds to effects that V have, so the macro has on the micro, and causal decoupling are effects that the macro has on itself. And I can define those formally again, so downward causation is unique information from Vt to xit prime, and this causal decoupling is the unique information that V has about itself conditional on the micro. Happy to give more mathematical details of those for whoever's interested. And I just want to give a very few comments about this causal decoupling because it's a kind of funky one. Again, it is something that is, it's a macroscopic pattern that is interacting with itself, but not with any of the microscopic things that are generated. So for those of you that are a bit more familiar with this area, if you calculate things like transfer entropy or Granger causality, it has zero transfer entropy and zero Granger causality from any part of the system. So it is not caused by anything, and it is not causing anything except for itself. It's just some sort of weird pattern hovering on top. For that reason, we typically and half-jokingly refer to causal decoupling as a statistical ghost, some pattern perpetuating itself. And in that way, this causal decoupling joins a very established field of supernatural statistics, such as spectral approaches to ghost detection, the paranormal distribution, and the astral planes. I stole all those jokes from paper from ages ago. Good. So with that out of the way, we can actually decompose causal emergence formally using phi-ID, which is an extension of the theory of PID. So we can basically decompose synergy, this sort of total emergence capacity, into causal decoupling plus downward causation. Mathematically, it's an identity. Yeah, there you go. And now what we do with this, so far we have developed all of this theory and these sort of mathematical constructs, but I haven't actually told you how to compute any of this and how to use it in real experimental data. So we came up with this quantity that we call psi, that is defined like this. So it's basically mutual information on the autocorrelation of the macroscopic variable Vt minus some mutual information between the parts and the macro. Again, I can prove a number of properties about this, but suffice to say that if you have this Vt and you have this xt recorded from experimental data, then these things are relatively easy to estimate with standard numerical, in MATLAB or the like. And we can prove that actually a feature Vt is causally emergent if psi is greater than 0. So we can now go have experimental data, we can compute the macro feature, we calculate this psi, and it will tell us if there is actually emergence going on in the system. And this has a bunch of pros and cons. So as a pro, this uses only standard mutual information, which is nice and easy to compute. It's computed only using pairwise marginals, which helps with the curse of dimensionality, and it has no false positive. So if this thing is positive, we know for sure there is emergence. On the con side, this needs a candidate feature V, so you need to have a hypothesis as to something that might already be emergent. This double count redundancy, which means basically it has a reduced sensitivity, and it is inconclusive if psi is smaller than 0. But basically we have this sort of practical criteria for emergence. Let's now go and put it to the test. So I'm going to start by giving you a few case studies of emergence in systems that we believe are sort of paradigmatic examples of emergence. One of them being the game of life. And you may have seen this sort of cellular automata type systems where I have this array of cells that are on and off, or dead or alive, and their dynamics depend on the sort of relationship with their neighbors and how many neighbors are alive and so on. So what we did is basically run these rules of the game of life, where the microvariables are the individual cell states. The macrovariable is basically a particle descriptor of what kind of macroscopic pattern is happening in the game of life. You can see that these two are sort of individual separate particles that they collide and they produce some other particles. And it turns out if you use this x and this y to compute this these quantities from before, we see that psi in B is greater than 0, and therefore there is emergence in the game of life. We also see this with flocking behavior. So we have this mathematical model of birds moving around in a flock. As micro variable, we use the position of each individual bird, and as macro variable, we use the center of the flock. And we can tune this model with different parameter values. Or we can, for example, have these three cases where this is an avoidance parameter. So the higher this is, the further apart the birds will be from each other. If this thing is very low, then all the birds just come together. If this thing is very high, then all the birds just do random stuff. And if it's somewhere in the middle, then the birds do somewhat like a flock. So they'll come together, the flock for a little bit, and separate and come up again. Here in gray, we see the trajectory of every bird, and in red, the trajectory of the center of mass. We go ahead and calculate these things, and if you look at the plot on the left, we see that indeed there is a peak of this emergence at the middle that goes away when the birds are either too close to each other or too far away from each other. And finally, another example of now we're getting a bit closer to neuroscience, and we're going to talk about neural activity during motor control. So we've got data from 64-channel ECOG from some monkeys doing a behavioral task. And the macro variable is basically the position of the monkey during a food reaching task. So the monkey is sitting there with electrodes in its brain, and it's being given food, and it has to move its food, move its hand, get the food, and eat it. The position of the hand of the monkey in XYZ coordinates is recorded through a motion capture system, and we use a machine learning SVM to decode the hand information from the ECOG. And these are the time series from the real and the noisy ones, the decoded hand position. We use this as a macro variable, and again we see that psi is greater than 0, so we can say that motor activity, or at least the representation of motor activity, is an emergent property of the neural substrate, these 64 ECOG channels. Okay, so far we have defined this theory of emergence pretty thoroughly. What have we seen so far? We presented a rigorous quantitative theory of emergence based on information decomposition. And we have introduced some practical tools that are applicable to empirical analyses. Are there any questions so far? Great, I'm doing a very good job. So now let's move on to consciousness, which I'm hoping is an interest that many of you share. So, if you've seen this online, you're probably having an experience like this. Or you're seeing this talk in Zoom, and you have some sort of environment surrounding you, and you're hearing my voice and many others speaking background. So there's something about consciousness that feels integrated and irreducible. Consciousness feels like a thing, like a single thing. Yet at the same time, it is generated by the interaction of billions of neurons in your brain. So it is natural to hypothesize that consciousness might be related to emergence in the brain. It might be an emergent phenomenon in and of itself, whereby a multitude of neurons in your brain work together and act together to form your conscious experience. So we're going to ask now whether consciousness is related to emergence in the brain, and we're going to try and finesse this question a little bit and talk about specific aspects of consciousness and how they're related to specific aspects of emergence. So what we did as a test bed to explore the relationship between emergence and consciousness, investigate data for patients with disorders of consciousness. Which is 6 million globally, so this is basically patients in coma or minimum conscious state, or patients are bound to the hospital bed due to a variety of reasons, often traumatic brain injury. And we know that some of these patients, although they may be unresponsive, they may still be conscious. And this is what we call covert consciousness, beautifully shown in this paper by Eudaimonia and collaborators, where we use an MRI to see whether patients were unresponsive or still conscious by asking them to imagine that they're playing tennis or walking around their houses. So what do we do? Maybe a brief overview of the analysis that we used. So we got data from 39 subjects. I believe it was 21, 18 health controls, plus 21 patients of unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, basically coma. 10 minutes of resting state fMRI, provided by colleagues in the University of Cambridge. We used a standard pipeline with pre-processing, denoising, and the shift to isolation. And then we calculated this emergence capacity in subsets of brain regions. So now we don't have a specific macro variable, we calculate the synergy basically. How emergent could the neural dynamics be? And if we go to our key question, will this conscious level correlate with emergence? And the answer is decidedly yes. So emergence predicts this unresponsive wakefulness syndrome. We see this very clear decrease from the healthy controls having the highest level of emergence on the left, and on the right, the comatose patients, the unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, having the least level of emergence capacity. So far for emergence, I'm going to take a brief turn now. I'm going to talk about brain hierarchy. And brain hierarchy, I guess that some of you have heard of this. It is fundamental organization principle of the brain whereby there's a natural, spontaneous organization of the brain to some areas that have an influence on others and others that have varying levels of influence on each other. And what we did was run some recent papers on some recent measures that quantify this notion of hierarchy by these authors called and Deco. You may not know them. And the way it works is basically if you have fMRI data from a brain scan, you can identify these things called driver events, which are what we think are cases of region in the brain broadcasting information, sending information away to other areas. You see how many of the other areas respond to this sort of thing. We put these together in a matrix, and we see what's the largest component of regions that respond to this driver event. If we take the standard deviation of this is somewhat a proxy measure for the hierarchical character of the brain. Right? Because if some regions have a very strong effect, that will result in a very high number of regions affected. If some other regions are below the hierarchy, they will have a very small response than here, so the wider this distribution is, the more separation there is in the brain hierarchy. So does this also correlate with emergence of conscious level? Yes, indeed. So hierarchy discriminates between patients with disorders of consciousness and health controls, very closely correlated with this idea of emergence capacity, which highlights some interesting connections between the two. Then we also set out to actually model this thing and try to explain where it comes from. So for this we use sort of new set of techniques that are called whole brain modeling. That basically allows us to go on a brain, go on a computer, type the equations that we believe describe the dynamics of individual brain regions, put them all together, and see whether the resulting simulated activity looks like the real brain activity that we measure in an fMRI scan. We use this model called the dynamic mean field, or DMF model, that basically works like this. So we have what's called a structural connector of the brain, the literal white matter connection tracks between different regions of the brain. We have some equations that describe the local dynamics, including some excitatory neurons and some inhibitory neurons that take inputs from other regions and then broadcast outputs to some other regions. And that gives us some simulated time series that look like brain activity and fMRI measurements. We use this model. We also made a few improvements actually. So we recently put out this new preprint with a more efficient and faster DMF implementation that we call FastDMF. You can access it here. It has a C++ backend with Python and MATLAB binding, so you can call it from whichever language you prefer. And this is basically exponentially, not very exponentially, but substantially faster and more memory efficient than a naive MATLAB-based implementation of DMF. We put our data, our structural connectors into this model, and we see that indeed the whole model replicates the empirical results. So with only the structural connections, like the anatomical white matter connections of the control subjects, the minimally conscious, and the responsive patients, we can reproduce this spectrum of both emergence capacity and spatial temporal hierarchy that correlates with the level of consciousness. So we can basically, using the idea of open models, we can track, we can attribute this loss of emergence to changes in the structural content of these subjects following traumatic brain injury. Okay, any questions so far? I think this concludes this analysis. Yes.
Just a quick one. On slide 35, you show in the corner that blue diagram, and you said that shows the level of kind of difference in the hierarchy. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Yes. So this is a bit of a proxy measure for how much. I mean, I guess others in the room can probably explain this a little better. I'm going to have them test it. And I apologize in advance for mistakes. But the idea is that when you have one of these regions that have a driver effect, so there's a spike of activity that gets sent to all other regions in the brain. A region is higher in the hierarchy if this driver element reaches many other regions, and many of them become active shortly afterwards. Therefore, if a region is high in the brain hierarchy, the largest component will be very high. So you will have an entry in the histogram that is higher. If a region conversely is low in the hierarchy, when it has a driver event, very few others will join. So the largest component will be very small and will be in the bottom here. So the wider this distribution is, the more of a sort of gap there is between the highest part of the hierarchy and the lowest part of the hierarchy. Yes.
You can choose to take this question now, or you can reserve it to the end. But the question is, so it seems like this idea is that consciousness is associated with having more synergistic information in the brain.
Yes.
And to that extent, it feels more related to the older IIT2 than IIT3.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so? Then, what do you think is the relationship between IIT and this?
That's a very good question. I do think that IIT2 at least is very, very closely related to synergy. Actually, if you do the math properly for this whole information composition, you will see that if you decompose meshes of integrated information, like phi, you will see that a large component of them is actually synergistic information. So this theory of emergence is very close to IIT2. I can't really speak for IIT3 because that introduces so many other components that becomes a bit difficult to track. But certainly, this is very close to IIT2.
There is also another thing one can do, because once you have a whole brain model, you can start to lesion that or take it out, and you can essentially look at what are the components that are creating this synergy. So that's another way of operationalizing for the first time, I think, IIT.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that is a low-hanging fruit from this.
Yeah, that's it.
And also, just to be supplementary, it does actually. It does seem that you can't have a simplistic idea of building your own workspaces in the sense that the information is synergistically distributed in the brain rather than a broadcast signal where you can track it. It does.
But there is a middle ground there. It could be that the synergy is only within a smaller subset. So it could well be that the lower parts of the system don't actually have to be in there for emergence to occur. So there could be a hierarchical system, but with emergence within the central parts.
Yeah, exactly. Cool, so now I'm going to switch gears slightly. I'm going to give you another brief study of emergence in the brain. And I'm going to sort of try to tease you with this aphorism of what it is, this question of what it's like to be a bit, which is a kind of funny take on Nagel's what it's like to be a bat. And this is sort of a bunch of theories that we put together, a bunch of hypotheses that we put together in this paper titled What It's Like to Be a Bit, and then they go into information decomposition account of emergent mental phenomena. And there's a whole bunch of information in the study that I'm not familiar with in detail, but one of the things that we, again, related to integrated information theory, one of the things that we speculate is that different components of the total information that is being shared in the system, some of them correspond to consciousness, and the subset of those correspond to the sense of selfhood in a system. And we hypothesize in particular that the sense of selfhood is related to causal decoupling. I'm not going to go into the detailed philosophical argument, we can do that after the talk, but that's a hypothesis that we basically laid out in this paper. So we can go and actually test this, and this is results are going to be in a hopefully very soon to appear paper. And what we did is we used source localized magnetoencephalographic, so MEP data from subjects under the influence of psychedelic drugs, specifically placebo and LSD, with subjective experience ratings. So we got MEP data from these subjects after having taken a placebo and after having taken an LSD, those of LSD in the psychedelic state. We compute these measures of causal decoupling, and indeed we see that causal decoupling is vastly reduced, basically throughout the brain. when subjects are under the effect of LSD. And furthermore, not only is causal decoupling reduced all over the place, but actually if you look at causal decoupling across the default mode network, then this is significantly correlated with subjective ratings of ego dissolution, which agrees with our original hypothesis relating this causal decoupling, this sense of statistical ghost, with the sense of self of the subjects. So, concluding this section on emergence and consciousness, we have shown that there's reduced emergence capacity in unconscious patients with disorders of consciousness, linking emergence with the conscious level. We've also seen that the results can be explained using corporate models. They are fantastically powerful tools, and that psychedelic-induced ego dissolution can be linked with causal decoupling as sort of per our hypothesis. Yes.
Again, feel free to take this question, but this is very, very interesting. But the thing that sort of is sticking out for me is so you've got less causal decoupling. I mean, you've got a reduction in causal decoupling. So there's less the whole brain determining the next stage of the whole brain.
Yeah.
But if you think that the level, well, these ideas that psychedelic states have higher levels, therefore whatever, more, perhaps more integrated information or something like that. Well, that's going in the this is going in the other direction, saying that actually there's less synergistic information, but you just showed that there's more. I mean, it's less synergistic information.
There is less synergistic information in the psychedelic state, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that goes against the idea that psychedelic states are sort of higher levels of consciousness.
Yes,
That's
indeed.
very interesting.
I wouldn't say that psychedelics have a higher level of consciousness. I would say there's a more diversity of conscious content.
This is very interesting.
And I would sort of make those two orthogonal.
So this is like a big conclusion.
It's an interesting result, I would say. Yeah. Great. So in the last few minutes, I'm almost done, but I'm actually very excited to tell you about a recent project that we've started, kind of mixing sort of emergence and art. And this project that goes by the name of SYNCH.LIVE. So now I'm going to forget everything about brains. I'm going to focus now a bit more on the social aspect of sort of these emergent phenomena. And I want to go back to these guys, to these starlings flocking in the sky. I'm completely fascinated by these little birds. And I want to, well, building on what we've just done, we have introduced this theory that essentially determines or tells you what makes a flock over and above a group of birds. One thing that we haven't really touched upon is actually how does it feel to be a part of a flock? Do birds know that they are flocking, or how do they relate to the other birds, or do they know that they're part of something that's bigger than any one of them? And to try and get some insights, however sort of qualitative, on these ideas, we started this project that we call SYNCH.LIVE, that is closely inspired by these phenomena of blinking fireflies in the dark that I'm not sure you've seen, but it's really beautiful. So I'm going to show you some example, if it plays. Yes, so these are these sort of blinking fireflies that blink in the dark and slowly synchronize all together, and you see this very beautiful emergent patterns of all the fireflies blinking in synchrony to attract mates, of course, because what else? So inspired by this sort of natural phenomena, we developed this project of SYNCH.LIVE. And how does this work, actually? So this works, this is a sort of participatory art / science experiment, where the way this works is we get a group of people together, we give them this sort of hats with blinking lights, and we just tell them, you need to synchronize the light in your hats, very much like the fireflies. And we let the participants move around, and there's a real-time feedback system with computer vision and online learning that basically allows participants to have this first-person experience of collective emergence. In a technical level, how does this work? So we have two parts. One, we have an observer system that sits at the top and is observing what's going on in the play area. And we have some player hats with these sort of funky lights that every player is wearing. the observer system has a camera. What it does is it extracts the trajectories of the players as they move in the area with computer vision, and it computes this psi quantity of emergence of the group of players. Then this player had some LED lights and some tiny Raspberry Pi. They have a coordinated sense of time with the neighboring hats, and they adjust their blinking based on psi. What the participants don't know is that the more emergent they are, the more in sync they are, and they just need to, coordinate through this feedback mechanism to form basically an emergent flock.
Just one. What's the underlying? Is the position vector the axis?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is how the hats look like, and they're fantastic pieces of engineering that our lead engineer Madalena Sass made, and they blink and they sort of flash in all these beautiful ways. And the way this actually looks, if you see it from above, so this is the actual information that goes into the observer system. And this is people moving in a sort of 10 by 10 meter area. And you can see the similarities with the bird flocks and the fireflies and everything. These are people moving and trying to coordinate their hat lights.
This is in silence.
This is all in silence, no talking. There's only sort of ambient music. Actually, we picked music for psychedelic therapy as a sort of soundtrack of the experiment.
But no drugs involved.
Yet. And this is how it looks from above, but actually how it looks from the inside. People have a lot of fun. And you see people are sort of trying to chase each other and play and moving around, trying to fly around like little birds. And all of this while trying to coordinate their hat lights and figuring out how to move in a flock through this feedback mechanism. So people have a lot of fun, and many of them actually succeed. And we are using this project to investigate a number of open scientific questions, such as, can people learn to emerge without direct guidance? Is it easy to emerge with people we feel close to? Do people's feelings of connectedness or empathy change after emerging with others? And can we use a project like SYNCH.LIVE to solve conflicts and build teams through this notion of shared experiences? So as a summary, we have this project called SYNCH.LIVE that is a science experiment and participatory art experience. It's enabled by emergence theory and computer vision, and it's all open source and open hardware. So if you're interested, please go and visit our website, synch.live, and you'll see many more funky dragonfly-like firefly videos. And that's all I have for you today. So as a brief wrap-up, what we have seen today is this rigorous quantitative theory of emergence that based on information decomposition. We have used emergence quantities to index conscious level and psychedelic ego dissolution. And we have talked a little bit about SYNCH.LIVE and how it combines emergence, society, and arts. If you're interested, you can visit my website to learn a little bit more. And thank you so much for listening. And I'm going to leave you with at least references here in case anyone's interested. And I'm happy to take any questions.
What a feast. Fantastic. I was hoping you would bring the hats today. That would have been perfect with 45.
It would have been ideal, yes.
But maybe next time we have to do another one. So I'm sure there are questions more than the ones we've taken. Shamil, I imagine, would have one.
I have a quick one, just on the SYNCH.LIVE, super cool. Did you see the psi metric actually increase?
Yes.
First of all. Second of all, could you ascertain, so the underlying microstates of the XTs, the position vectors, could you ascertain what was the VT that they were making, the supervenient macro property?
So right now we are estimating all of these quantities using the center of mass of the flock as a sort of collective property. As a VT.
Okay, got it.
We're also investigating other properties of the geometry of the flock and the shape of the flock. But for now, the center of mass seems to be working okay.
If they knew that, they would just all huddle.
If they knew that, yeah, they would basically get on a block and move randomly, but they don't, right? And that's part of the fun, that we only tell them, synchronize your hands.
Okay, got it.
And they spontaneously, it's a lot of fun. You can see some people get frustrated and leave, but some others are very curious and they try things and they go one way and it doesn't work and then they go another way. And at the end, when they succeed, they have this sort of rainbowy lights and they get very happy. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So how many hats have you got?
So we've got 12 hats for now. Actually, we come from just 2 days ago, we ran about 300 subjects. So 30 groups in the Imperial Science Festival. This is all very recent. That's why I don't have any data, because we just did the experiment a week ago. And I have 12 hats. The idea is to then scale this up and not have this with 10 players, but with 50 or 100 players in a stadium and all of them trying to flock together. That'd be amazing, but that's still a bit far.
Fantastic. So have we got more questions in the room?
Yes.
Do you have any predictions for how this scaling up will affect the movement? Like, do you think it'll still kind of be the same?
I think it would be more, I expect stronger effects throughout. I think people will feel more part of a group, and also there will be more actual collective behavior. Also, one thing that we've seen is that if the overall group is very small, it's very easy for people to just go away, and like a group of 4 people doesn't feel like a big group when you're doing a flock. 4 people is still a very small flock. If you have 50, then that will feel a lot more unified. And I think people will have this stronger tendency to merge with the group, the more people there are.
This fits well with the Starlink. Remember the PNAS paper from the Italian group? Once they went below 16, they started having problems with single flocking behavior.
Yep.
So that's my question earlier. How many do you have?
Yes.
How many do you need?
That's a whole other question, as many as we can. So far we have 12, but we plan to increase that.
So in football games with the crowds, right? They flock, singing, doing the wave.
Yes, exactly.
And now they could all be wearing hats while they do it, as they run onto the pitch.
Yeah, we're actually starting also now a project analyzing sports data, see to what extent teams that emerge are more effective or not. We'll see. It's still very speculative, but we'll see.
Wonderful. More questions in the room? Anybody online? Kat, can you see whether anybody has raised their hand? Well, this really has been a feast. You've shown us, I think, some fantastic data on emergence that we'll be feasting on for some time. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And so we have the usual thing, we have food, coffee, but there'll be more food and bonfire later. That's another story. Thank you. Thank you.